Tonight, a forest fire burning in Churchill Falls is growing, and that's cause for concern for those who have stayed behind.
Unfortunately, we've just got word that the fire has jumped the river, which is what we were trying to prevent. It's what we were all hoping wouldn't happen.
A full evacuation of all essential workers at the Churchill Falls hydroelectric plant as the wildfire intensifies.
They had a very ambitious goal of unveiling this in just 13 months' time, July 1st, 1922. That didn't happen.
A little later on Here and Now, ahead of our special Memorial Day coverage, we're looking back at the stories behind the National War Memorial with a special feature-length documentary.
This is CBC Here and Now.
Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. We begin tonight with breaking news out of Labrador, where crews are evacuating all the remaining essential workers who are left in the town of Churchill Falls. Now, the stretch of Trans-Labrador Highway that runs between that community and Labrador City Wabush is shut down this evening. The forest fire has jumped to the north side of the river and presents a bigger danger to the town. Here and Now's Peter Cowan is tracking the situation. He's live in the newsroom. So, Peter, the story is developing quickly. What's the latest on the fire?
Well, yeah, the weather has not been a help today, Carolyn. Southwest winds, warm temperatures, low humidity have all fueled that fire, causing it to grow and jump across the river. Let's show you the latest. These are the latest pictures that we have, and you can see the intensity. That smoke has really picked up, really visible in the community. There are about 100 people or so who are left behind. You can see things like the industrial sprinklers they have set up there to try and protect the community. Now, those 100 people are going to have to leave. Speaking this afternoon, the Premier said the fact that that big fire has crossed over to the north side of the Churchill River has him worried.
We hoped, we prayed that the fire would stay on the correct side of the river and that the river would act as a natural barrier, fire break. So very concerning, but I think it's premature to say how the fire will behave in what is in a new scenario with an incredible amount of fuel in front of it on the banks of that river.
Now, one of the impacts of this is the power is out right now in Labrador West. MHA Jordan Brown and Lisa Dempster have both posted updates saying that the fire has crossed over the power lines between Churchill Falls and Labrador City and Wabush, and water bombers actually had to dump water on them, causing those lines to trip. So there is a backup plan in place to get some power from Quebec, but it will be less than what they normally receive from Churchill Falls.
Okay, so Peter, what does it mean for the power plant now that everyone has to leave?
Yeah, so when they designed Churchill Falls in the 1960s, no one was even thinking about remote operations. But over the last week, workers have been able to set up some remote operations and some monitoring. So what they've done is they've reduced the power output from the plant to a minimum, about 25% of capacity, and they will then be able to monitor it remotely. Here's Jennifer Williams with Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro.
We're working with our customers to make sure that they know that they are going to have limited ability to vary their load or their draw on the plant right now. So as long as no other things change materially, we should be able to continue even if we have to take people fully out of the plant. Certainly not ideal. It hasn't been done before, but that is what we're hoping that we should be able to do with implementation of this remote monitoring and very little remote operation ability.
Now, if the plant does go offline or the power lines to the east are affected, officials told us today that Muskrat Falls can provide power to Happy Valley Goose Bay. Carolyn?
Thanks so much, Peter. That's Here Now's Peter Cowan reporting live. Now, for anyone evacuating Churchill Falls and heading to Happy Valley Goose Bay, you're asked to check in with the team on the ground at the YMCA, and anyone heading to Labrador West is asked to check in at the local RNC detachment upon arrival.
Time for a look at your weather forecast. Ryan Snodden in for Ashley again this evening. And let's start in Western Labrador with the situation there. Obviously, the forecast so critical. And yes, wet weather tonight in through Wednesday. Welcome news for sure. And you can see, though, the winds, unfortunately, from the southwest and breezy as well. That's the downside of the forecast there. But a solid drink looks like at least 10 millimeters, maybe as much as 15 to 20 millimeters. Fingers crossed. Again, it's on the higher end of that. We will be drying out for Thursday, though staying rather cloudy. Temperatures right around 11 degrees, and then some more wet weather back in for Friday. Not as substantial wet shot with that one, but again, all the moisture, the better. And you can see as we move through tonight, that rain across the Avalon will clear out, and then we've got this next system that's going to be moving in and bringing that wet weather to western parts of Labrador. That moves off to the north, and then this is the secondary system we're watching for Thursday, which will miss Lab West, but a third round coming for Friday, which will bring at least a better chance of some showers into the mix for western Labrador. More on this story, of course, with your full forecast update coming up in a few minutes. Caroline.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Well, in other news, a 30-year-old paramedic died at a swimming hole in Dildo over the weekend. Witnesses say he was attempting to help another swimmer. According to the RCMP, it happened on Ballfield Road shortly after 3:30 Saturday afternoon. Devin George reportedly went underwater and did not resurface. Police were told that George had been helping a young child get safely to shore just prior to going underwater. A constable and firefighters were able to recover him from the water, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. Well, the Life Saving Society is warning the public to keep safety top of mind, especially at your local swimming holes where conditions can change in a matter of minutes.
Typically calm water, you look at it and you have no concerns, but certainly on a day like today where we're expecting a lot of rain, that can change the flow of water in a river or in a swimming hole or in a pond very rapidly. So you really need to be familiar with the conditions that you're going with. And again, having that safety net of going with a friend, not being intoxicated so your judgment's not impaired, and obviously if you're using any kind of vehicle, having that personal flotation device, so if you got into trouble, it can keep you on top of the water until someone can get you out of the water.
And we have another fatality to report tonight. A 64-year-old man died yesterday morning after going off the road near Port Blandford. It happened along the Trans-Canada Highway. Police say the vehicle went off the roadway and rolled onto its side. The driver, who was the lone occupant and reportedly not wearing a seatbelt, was located outside the vehicle with severe injuries. He later died in hospital in Clarenville. Now to news from the courts. A St. John's man has been sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. David Quirk stabbed a woman to death in 2021 and was initially charged with second-degree murder. Here Now's Mark Quinn was in court today and has this report.
David Quirk showed no emotion as he was led away by sheriff's officers. He's been sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for killing 42-year-old Raina Dove. Quirk stabbed Dove 3 times in 2021 at the shelter here on Cookstown Road where they were both living. It began as a dispute over a butter knife that they had to use to open doors at the shelter where they lived. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter in February. Judge Vikas Kaladkar said he believes that Quirk is truly sorry about what happened, and he believes that Quirk can be rehabilitated. Dove's mother and family were at the sentencing. They asked the Crown to explain the decision before making a very brief comment.
I don't have the words because my daughter's gone and he's just gonna go somewhere and sit and be fed, and we're gonna pay for that, and then he'll go home to his mother. My daughter's gone.
In a victim impact statement, Dunphy said Dove wrote that she feared for her life at the shelter. The judge said the fear that both Quirk and Dove were experiencing at the shelter fueled the fight that led to Dove's death. In a news release today, the NDP said the provincial government has been too slow to develop safety standards for shelters. A provincial government report about those standards was expected to be made public in June. But so far, that report and the expected shelter standards have not been released. Mark Quinn, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, Premier Andrew Furey says Princess Anne's presence at Monday's Memorial Day ceremony would have elevated the event, but due to an accident, her visit to the province was cancelled. The princess was taken to hospital after she was reportedly struck by a horse. The Royal Canadian Legion has invited the Princess Royal to the ceremony marking the National War Memorial's 100th anniversary and the entombment of the unknown soldier. The Premier says the Princess will be here in spirit and has a special attachment to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment.
I think it would have given it the due weight that is deserved and required from the Crown. But her absence will not diminish the significance of the event in any way, shape, or form. We wish her the utmost best, and perhaps she can return when we unveil a plaque to acknowledge her presence here.
September 4th, 1919, St. George's. Dear Sir, I wrote to you a long while ago about my son's clothes, Charles Bennett, and you never sent it. Yet, please, send it right away, because I'm in need of it, for his poor father wants it bad. Try to send it as quick as you can. You said you was going to send it to me. Let me know about it. Oblige. Maggie Bennett. P.S. That was the only son we had.
An unsettled pattern across the province over the next few days with systems coming and systems going. We'll see some sunshine in the mix as well. Your full forecast is coming up.
On July 1st, join us for a very special program, a historic day in St. John's.
There's a lot of emotions. We're all feeling it. Tears we're going through.
More than 100 years ago, he was one of thousands who signed up to serve in the First World War. Now, after a long and lonely century buried an ocean away, one of Newfoundland and Labrador's sons has come home.
One word, I guess, if you had to sum it up, would be pride.
Join me, Heather Hiscox, at the National War Memorial in St. John's as the unknown soldier is finally laid to rest. At 7:30 a.m. Eastern, 9 in Newfoundland, everywhere you watch CBC News.
Time for a look at your full weather forecast. Ryan Snodden in for Ashley again this evening. And let's start with where the rainfall warning is still in effect across the Avalon. Another 10, 15, maybe 20 millimeters as this will be again continuing this evening, but tapering off as we move through the late evening and overnight as this system does continue to track off to the east. And yeah, we'll still look at some lingering showers, but not nearly as steady as it has been throughout the day today. This is the system we're watching, which is going to bring that beneficial wet weather into western parts of Labrador. And as we look at the rainfall outlook, additional rainfall this evening into the overnight, again, looking at another 10 millimeters across the Avalon, as you can see, maybe as much as 20. And there is the rain that's going to be tracking into western Labrador. And again, 10 looks like a pretty good bet, which is great. And perhaps in these pockets shaded in yellow, maybe as much as 20 millimeters. And so we'll keep our fingers crossed that it's on the higher end of that range. And that is, again, by the time we get to Wednesday night into Thursday, rather. So some showers Lab West for tonight and up towards Nain as well. Showers for the Avalon, of course, rain tapering to showers. Looking at those showers for Central, back towards Port aux Basques, but dry, Corner Brook and up to the Northern Peninsula. And it's all thanks to the track of this system, which you can see. We'll be watching that wet weather into even Thursday morning with some lingering showers for eastern, central parts of the island, but dry. Corner Brook up towards the Northern Peninsula, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and eastern Labrador. There's that wet weather moving into Lab West, and that will really track in as we move throughout the day tomorrow. And you can see things kind of clearing off for central, eastern parts of Newfoundland, so we will see a better afternoon. And temperatures getting a little bit warmer as well. It looks like we'll range from most of us into the high teens and edging into the 20s from Grand Falls, Windsor back towards Corner Brook, certainly up through Grossmorn, and then towards the Northern Peninsula, temperatures cool off a little bit again. 28 in Happy Valley, Goose Bay tomorrow, and you can see where that frontal boundary is. 10 in Nain, 17 in through Lab City, and again, that wind will be shifting to northwest for Labrador City on the other side of that front. So temperatures will go from 17 to about 11 degrees into the afternoon in Labrador City. Churchill Falls, looks like that front crosses more so into the evening with a shift to northwest tomorrow evening into the overnight. And it's all on the other side of this front, which will again work its way into Happy Valley, Goose Bay Wednesday night. By the time we get to Thursday, a quiet start to the day across the province. This next system moving up through the Gulf and will be pushing in through southeastern Labrador, western Newfoundland by Thursday afternoon. Turning damp here. This is where the clouds will be. Temperatures will be a bit cooler. The Avalon looking at a nice day on Thursday. Temperatures near 20 degrees. Shower chances edging into Gander, more so Grand Falls, Windsor. And you can see Labrador City and Churchill Falls on the outside looking in with this system, which will then continue to track off to the north. Secondary low developing in behind will bring wet weather all across the island for Friday into southeastern parts of Labrador and perhaps a few showers edging into Churchill Falls. Now, as you can see here for the forecast, there's temperatures thankfully remaining nice and mild, at least for Friday. Saturday looking okay. Sunday, increasing clouds. Fingers crossed, but looks like maybe some wet weather to contend with for Canada Day. Fingers crossed that that system will stay a little bit further to the east, but we'll keep you posted on that. As you can see for Central, looking at those shower chances clearing Wednesday. As we said, Thursday, it's a late day risk into Friday, and then Saturday looking good with some shower chances creeping in for Sunday. Western Labrador, or Western Newfoundland rather, again, looking damp Thursday into Friday. Saturday looking good, turning damp on Sunday again. For Happy Valley, Goose Bay, wet weather Thursday and Friday, but the weekend at least looking a little warmer with temperatures up towards 20 degrees. And again, looking at that forecast for Friday, isolated shower chances, a better chance of some wet weather into the mix for Western Labrador for the weekend. That is your forecast. And now, Carolyn, back to you.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
May 2nd, 1918, Portugal via Lameline. Dear Sir, I wish to know if you received any further particulars about my brother who died at Le Cateau in hospital on January 25th, 1918. If you could find out anything more from the Geneva Red Cross concerning his death, I would like to know if he died from his wounds or not. We received a postcard from him saying he was wounded in the left leg. And my sister received a card from him, but he did not write it himself. If we knew who wrote it, and he could write a few lines to tell me about it, how nice that would be. If you have any of his kit or anything belonging to him, my mother would like to get it in remembrance of him. Kindly let me know if you can get any news that may comfort a mother in her hour of trial and sadness. I remain yours truly, Edgar Hillier.
Well, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the National War Memorial in downtown St. John's, and tonight we're looking back at the history of the famous landmark, the people and the money behind the project, and the disputes that cropped up along the way. The CBC's Terry Roberts, along with video producers Danny Arsenault and Ted Dillon, explore the story of Newfoundland's National War Memorial in this documentary called Enduring Witness.
July 1st, 1924, a bittersweet but historic day in what was then the self-governing Dominion of Newfoundland. Nearly 6 years after the armistice that ended the bloody First World War, and more than 3 years after planning began, the Newfoundland National War Memorial in downtown St. John's is officially dedicated. In a city steeped in history, this was another moment, heavy with emotion and unconditional reverence for the hundreds of Newfoundlanders who died in a global conflict. A famous British general pulled a rope and removed the canvas that covered the elaborate monument.
By every estimate, this was the biggest crowd that ever gathered in Newfoundland for anything up to that point. It was our way of thanking those who had given their lives in the war.
There were 2,500 just in the parade, just various service groups and so on involved in the parade. And 20,000 people hanging out rooftops and out of windows and crowding the streets for the unveiling.
They said there was at least from 3,000 to 5,000 people who could not hear or could not see the memorial, but they were down there anyway. So that shows you, because it was raw in their mind, it was a huge and emotional time.
The bronze and granite monument was created to honor the more than 12,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who served and sacrificed during the First World War. More than 1,700 lost their lives, and roughly 800 of those who died have no known grave. The war was a defining moment in history for Newfoundland, which had a wartime population of around 240,000, less than half of what it is today. The monument was unveiled by Field Marshal Douglas Haig. In that era, he was world famous. Haig commanded the British Army on the Western Front for most of the war, including the 1916 Somme Offensive. That battle was one of the deadliest in human history. On July 1st, the Newfoundland Regiment was massacred at Beaumont Hamel. Haig wrote to the governor of Newfoundland just days after the battle. Newfoundland may well feel proud of her sons, whose heroism and devotion to duty displayed on July 1st have never been surpassed. Haig had a soft spot for the Newfoundlanders, and the feeling was mutual. A special poppy campaign was organized to pay for his trip to Newfoundland. Haig was a celebrity, credited for orchestrating victory over the Germans. When he was in St. John's in early July 1924, it was celebrated as Haig Week.
They had a man who was then a virtual superstar, Field Marshal Haig, who was greatly admired by soldiers who served under him during the war, which was a large number of the Newfoundlanders who served. And so you have this moment that everybody knew was going to be a great moment. And so people showed up, and in very large numbers.
We have photos of the crowds crowding St. John's Harbor just trying to get a glimpse of the man. And Haig himself said he wanted to travel very simply. He didn't want any fuss up during his voyage. He just wanted to arrive, and it would be his honor to unveil the monument. He thought that was a really important part of his duty to the people. There was an entire week of him inspecting troops, inspecting Boy Scout groups, Girl Guides, the CLB. He was into everything.
But this was the main focus. Its artistry and design, crafted from bronze and granite, unlike anything ever seen in St. John's. A combination of allegorical and realistic bronze sculptures, designed by British artists Gilbert Bayes and Ferdinand Victor Blunstone. Elevated high atop a central pedestal, a female statue known as the Spirit of Newfoundland. The Victory Statue, a torch in her left hand, a symbol of freedom, inspired by the famous poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae.
The torch, be yours to hold it high.
A sword poised in her right hand, ready for battle if freedom is threatened again. Lower on the monument, 4 realistic figures represent the different branches in which most served during the war. On the west pedestal, a sailor holding a spyglass, representing those who joined the Royal Naval Reserve. A Royal Newfoundland Regiment soldier is crouched on one knee on the east pedestal, dressed in full battle gear, loading his rifle and searching the horizon for the enemy. At the front of the monument, statues of a fisherman and a logger symbolize those who served with the Merchant Marine and the Newfoundland Forestry Companies. This bronze plaque explains that the memorial was erected by a grateful people to honor its war dead. Similar plaques have been added to commemorate those who died in the Second World War, the Korean War, and the war in Afghanistan. The monument is seated on a granite semicircular dais, rising from the entrance on Water Street to the cenotaph on Duckworth Street. For generations, it's been the focal point of remembrance. Designated a National Historic Site in 2019, the only war memorial in Canada to receive such a distinction. But if you're going to tell the story of the Newfoundland National War Memorial in St. John's, you have to start here in northern France. This is the Beaumont-Hamel Newfoundland Memorial, and it was on battlefields like this where the deadly toll of war was exacted, and also ignited such a powerful desire to remember those who served, and especially those who never came home. It was a big moment, and it took a big personality to make it happen. Meet Thomas Nangle. Thomas Nangle was a Catholic priest in St. John's who served as padre to the regiment. He served alongside the soldiers, in the trenches, burying the dead, consoling the wounded, and motivating the troops. After the war, he returned to France and Gallipoli and played a big role in recovering and identifying the remains of Newfoundland soldiers who were killed in battle. He also spearheaded the establishment of 5 caribou memorials in France and Belgium, what came to be known as the Trail of the Caribou, and was called upon in early 1922 to help with the National War Memorial after the effort began to stall.
He knew more than anyone else how important it was for the mothers of those people and all their families. And the feeling was, are we just going to forget them now? And the mothers and the fathers, at home for the rest of their lives, especially the mothers, will take that emptiness and hurt to the grave. They started in 1918 talking about it, but it took until Padre Nangle finally had it finished in 1924. He was the leading person, the energy behind it.
July 1st, 1916. It's the opening day of the Battle of the Somme, and the Newfoundland Regiment is ordered to advance at Beaumont-Hamel. It's the regiment's first major offensive. It ends in tragedy. Nearly 800 men go into battle. In half an hour, more than 700 are either killed, wounded, or missing. Throughout the war, the regiment suffered one of the highest casualty rates of any unit under British command. Of the more than 6,200 men who enlist, 1,305 lose their lives. Another 2,314 are wounded. Nearly every family in Newfoundland was touched by the war. And those who lost a loved one, well, they had to struggle through their grief without saying a proper goodbye. That's because our dead never came home. They were either buried in cemeteries near the battlefield where they fell, or their remains were never found or identified, and they have no known grave. So the emotions on the day of the unveiling of the War Memorial in St. John's are still very raw. Many in attendance are veterans of the Great War, still carrying the scars, both physically and emotionally, of a war that claimed millions of lives. Thousands of families are still in a daze, filled with questions about what happened to their lost sons. For many who enlisted, the war was a path to adventure, a chance to serve king and country. For others, it was a journey out of poverty, and many were signing up at the ages of 16, even 15, lying about their ages.
Everything I could find, Terry, is logged and put into, and I got 2 more binders downstairs.
Gary Brown spent decades researching this era, combing through letters and documents, piecing together the trail of heartbreak left by the war. He wrote a book about Thomas Nangle. He also wrote about the boy soldiers who went to war.
Just put yourself in the shoes of a mother and a father. When a boy left and he was underage, and they sort of felt they let them go, and then all of a sudden they don't come back. They don't know where they're buried. So just think about the emotion of that.
Newfoundland was a self-governing dominion during the First World War, had its own legislature, control over its internal affairs. Britain's oldest colony, on par with other dominions such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. When Britain declared war on Germany in the summer of 1914, the Newfoundland government quickly fell in line and offered to raise an infantry regiment to serve alongside the British. A mere 4 months later, the first contingent of Newfoundlanders, known as the First 500, leave St. John's aboard the SS Florizel. For the next 4 years, Newfoundlanders forge a legacy of service and courage, whether it's in the trenches, at sea, in the forests of Scotland, or on the home front. But it's a legacy that comes at great expense in both blood and treasure. A generation of young men are either killed or disabled, and those who survive physical harm are tormented by the horrors they witness. It was all this grief, loss, heartache, and maybe even some guilt that ignited a movement in Newfoundland, a movement to remember, so war memorials start going up in communities across the land. Some of these memorials pay tribute to a single fallen soldier, like this one in Norris Point, honoring John Major. And larger war memorials like this one in Grand Falls, featuring the names of 55 local residents who died in the First World War. Newfoundland in the 1920s is a challenging place. The government is heavily in debt from building a railroad and the immense cost of supporting Britain's war effort. There's also political turbulence as successive governments are toppled and corruption is exposed, and veterans fight for pension benefits. The post-war period is one of economic stagnation.
And also in January 1921, the price of fish collapsed in overseas markets, which led to a lot of destitution and the requirement for government spending on relief of poverty. So the government didn't have a lot of money to play with.
The government of Newfoundland was not in a position to fund these memorials. But with 800 men missing in action, never returned home, graves unknown, where could everyone go to honor those men.
After war, Newfoundland is desperate to honor its fallen soldiers. That effort begins in earnest in June of 1921. Between 80 and 100 citizens, a who's who of the city's elite, assembles for a meeting.
Those gathered that very first night expressed a bit of embarrassment, disappointment in themselves that they hadn't gotten together sooner to start action on this. So they immediately started formulating a plan, and they had a very ambitious goal of unveiling this in just 13 months' time, July 1st, 1922. That didn't happen.
At this first meeting, there's disagreement. Some want a standalone war memorial, located in a prominent place and worthy of the sacrifices it's meant to symbolize. Some suggest a giant caribou, the emblem of the Newfoundland Regiment, atop Signal Hill. Others lobby for a school to be built in memory of the fallen. There's also debate over a location. 8 possible sites are considered. They eventually decide this is the spot, King's Beach, where Sir Humphrey Gilbert claims Newfoundland for the British Crown in 1583. A steep, rocky incline, a bleak but ideal location on the waterfront. It's close to where the first 500 embarked on the Florizel years earlier and was a welcome landmark for soldiers returning from the war. The project receives a boost when city leaders set aside $5,000 to blast rock from the site. And the Great War Veterans Association ensures that most of those doing the labor are veterans. But all is not well.
There was no money. People were a little bit resentful, even if it was an unspoken resentment of this attempt to raise this much money at a time when people were feeling, definitely an economic pinch. People were destitute, and here they are asking for money to build this huge monument.
Bonus.
The goal of the War Memorial Committee and people like Thomas Nangle is to create a war memorial in St. John's, one that pays tribute to the thousands who unselfishly and courageously ventured into the jaws of a global conflict. But the biggest stumbling block? Cash. So the committee begins a money-raising blitz. There's sporting tournaments and card games. They even offer rides in this airplane, owned by Major Sidney Cotton. And there's this unique fundraiser. The committee incorporates the National War Memorial Company Limited and begins selling $1 shares in the company. These booklets are circulated throughout Newfoundland and beyond.
He must have decided, well, I'm going to do this. I'm going to send my dollar.
Some donations are very personal and reflect the upheaval the war inflicted on families. Here's Frederick White of Twillingate. Frederick's girlfriend was pregnant when he went off to war, and his son Harvey was born in 1915, 10 months before the regiment's near annihilation at Beaumont Hamel. Frederick White is among those killed in battle and has no known grave. Here's his name on the bronze plaque at the base of the Caribou Monument at the Beaumont Hamel Newfoundland Memorial in northern France. In his hometown in Twillingate, Frederick White is remembered at this cemetery.
He died at his post, like a soldier brave. He has answered his captain's call. He sleeps far away in a hero's grave. For his country's cause, he did fall.
Frederick never saw his son Harvey, but this letter suggests that boy was eager to honor his father's sacrifice.
My grandfather was only a story, a legend, almost. We had a picture of him and his brother hanging in our house, and we had the medal that they sent to families. They called it the death penny.
This letter to Thomas Nangle resurfaced many years ago and found its way back to the White family in Twillingate. It appears to be a typed version of the original letter, is filled with spelling errors, and is signed by Harry White. But Eleanor Manuel believes her father, Harvey White, wrote the original letter.
And I had $1 gave me for keeping head of my class. So I am sending it to you for Beaumont Hamel Memorial. That is the spot where my father was killed, July 1st, 1916. I am enclosing $1. Yours very truly, Harvey White, Durrell's Arm, Twillingate.
The letter refers to a memorial at Beaumont Hamel. But is that what the young orphan from Twillingate meant? Beaumont Hamel? Maybe not.
The timing of this letter is just 3 weeks after Nangle becomes involved with the National War Memorial Committee. So there would have been quite a lot of radio coverage. It would have been in the newspapers that Father Nangle was taking this on, whereas he wasn't raising money for the Beaumont Hamel memorials.
The letter is now on display at the Rooms Museum. More than that, it's a family treasure for the descendants of Frederick White and Harvey White.
That must have struck him in some way, that when he earned this $1 for being the head of his class, he decided that's what he wanted to do with it.
By the winter of 1922, the committee has raised $15,000, a substantial figure for that era, but far short of their $50,000 goal. So the plan to unveil the monument in 1922 is shelved. While efforts are running out of steam in St. John's, Thomas Nangle, the regiment's beloved padre, is over here in France and Belgium building war memorials like this one. But he's also needed at home. So Nangle returns to Newfoundland. There's a meeting with the War Memorial Committee. Nangle is side by side with Newfoundland's Prime Minister, Richard Squires, at the meeting. There's a major shakeup. It's a turning point. Squires tells the committee his government will fund a school in honor of the war dead, Memorial University College, later to be called Memorial University of Newfoundland, opens on Parade Street in 1925. And Nangle also delivers some big news to the committee. The Imperial War Graves Commission is pledging £5 sterling for every Newfoundlander who died during the war.
So that would be more than enough create this war memorial, but he had one condition. He wanted free hand to do this. Let me do whatever it takes to create this memorial. I'll put together a proper committee, and this will be our focus. And we're going to make this happen by July 1st, 1924.
So things are back on track.
Right here, we're looking at some of the original sketches for the war memorial.
And it's here at the rooms in St. John's where much of the documents connected to that effort can be found. This archivist has been sifting through photos, meeting minutes, contracts, letters and drawings. Gerald Whitty, Robert Rendell, Jack Higgins. These names and others surface repeatedly as people at the forefront of the war memorial movement.
They spent a lot of time talking about the best plants to use, how the wind would flow through the site, and we're seeing all that sort of sketched in here, where the shrubs would be, the sidewalk, they're looking at snow breaks here, a chain fence along right here, and of course the retaining wall right here, which would be granite with the memorial plaques on it.
But these documents also lay bare some of the controversy and setbacks that nearly derail the effort. One of the biggest feuds involves Thomas Nangle and renowned British sculptor Basil Gatto. The two are well known to each other. Gatto had created the Fighting Newfoundlander statue at Bowring Park. He made the Caribou memorials in France and Belgium, so it made sense that Gatto would also create the statues for the National War Memorial in St. John's. But in 1923, Nangle fires Gatto. The biggest issue? This clay model of a Royal Naval Reserve sailor. He's shirtless, carrying a rifle, not an accurate reflection of the Naval Reserve.
So this was just one of the problems. Nangle writes back and says, well, Gatto doesn't quite seem to be understanding my vision for this monument. I've told him this isn't really what we need. This needs to be replaced with a ramrod or a swab. This can't be a rifle. But here's the model, the clay model, which never does get cast because just a few months later, they fire Basil Gatto. Nangle has reached an end with it. The telegram just says, Gatto is fired.
It wasn't just the model. There was a fight with Gatto over delivery dates and payments.
By the time Gatto was fired, they've gotten much, much lower quotes from other sculptors across Europe. And that's why they move on. They hire Ferdinand Blundstone and Gilbert Bayes to actually create the final sculptures that we see now. So it could have been a very different looking monument.
Many feel a monument would eventually have been completed, but the timeline and design may have been completely different if Nangle did not step up when he did.
I always get the impression that Nangle was a real go-getter. He was a very personable person. He was charming. They say he had the confidence of an athlete. He knew everybody.
I believe he had all this experience and expertise, and he was actually there in the trenches with the boys. He comes home. So what better person could we have found to look after that national memorial and bring it to fruition? You couldn't find a better person.
And it's through Nangle's connections that Rudyard Kipling, the famous English poet and novelist, becomes involved with the project.
Nangle had reached out to the author Rudyard Kipling to create the memorial tablet for Amiens Cathedral in France. And Kipling had happily done that, and he'd written a beautiful inscription that's on the tablet there. So he reached out to him again and said, would you be able to write something for our National War Memorial? And Kipling did that. So that lovely inscription that's on the monument now was written by Rudyard Kipling, author of Captain Courageous and the Jungle Book.
The granite for the monument, meanwhile, comes from quarries in Scotland. And again, Nangle found a unique way to cut costs.
He called everybody who may have an empty ship returning to St. John's Harbor and said, can we ship this as ballast? Can you take some granite? What can you do for me? So all of the granite and the sculptures came in about 6 or 7 different shipments of varying weights. He promised everybody that they would waive the customs fees when they got here. They said a deal with the government to waive the customs fees. So the grand total for bringing all of that granite here was next to nothing in the end.
By today's standards, this would have been a mega project in the early 1920s. No hydraulically operated heavy equipment back in these days. Men with strong backs and leathery hands did all this. Eventually, fundraising targets are met. When the monument is finished, every cent is spent. But this is the result. This memorial was unveiled 15 years before Canada's National War Memorial in Ottawa, and 27 years before Newfoundland became a province of Canada. And now it's about to become a cemetery as well. On July 1st, 100 years later, this will be the tomb of an unknown soldier.
That whole loop is closed when we put that remains down there. Now it becomes a Commonwealth War Graves cemetery, and Nangle dreams come true. Newfoundland, you've done it right. You have glorified your heroes. You have not glorified war.
The unknown soldier could be any one of hundreds. He could be from any family. He could be Eleanor Manuel's grandfather.
There's something about the tomb of the unknown soldier that brings tears. It brings tears because of the sacrifice they made and the families that were shattered. And, you know, it's a bittersweet honor. I mean, whoever it is, it's still a great honor to have our own provincial unknown soldier.
100 years ago, the memorial was new. A century later, it's shining again, ready for another 100 years of remembrance, carrying on the dream of Thomas Nangle and all the people who built this so long ago.
As loved our Father, so we loved, where once they stood we stand. Their prayers we raise to heaven above. God guard thee, Newfoundland. God guard thee, God guard thee, God guard thee, Newfoundland.
And you've been watching the documentary Enduring Witness, the story of Newfoundland's National War Memorial. We'll have more coverage throughout this week, and on Monday, July 1st, we'll bring you highlights from the Memorial Day ceremonies in St. John's. That'll be hosted by Heather Hiscox. And for the latest on the developing situation in Churchill Falls, you can head to our website, cbc.ca/NL. Thanks so much for spending part of your evening with us. Hope you can join us again tomorrow. Good night.